Hello, this is Corey. Before we go into today's podcast, I want to share with you that we are going to run the Confident and Consistent Leader Challenge again. We will launch it on November 1st. This will be the third time that we have ran it this year because, quite honestly, it's been successful. It is working and getting movement in people's lives. We ran it in the month of June, and then we ran it with a different group of leaders in the month of September, and people are having impact. One individual said he was thoroughly impressed with the content and structure and wouldn't change anything. Another leader said that the challenge has been fantastic and has been a true lifeline as they were shipwrecked on an island. So I don't know where you are coming at right now and what you're doing to end this year, but this challenge will help you end the year well and start off 2022 on strong footing. The challenge is in 4 different parts. First part is on perspective. What is your current reality? The second part is about potential. Where do you want to go at work, at home? The third week will be about priorities, helping you prioritize what you actually want to go after. And then the fourth week is about a path forward. It's putting things in place to help you go. The challenge consists of daily emails as well as videos to teach the content you watch on your own time, as well as live group coaching calls each week. So this challenge is working, and maybe now is your time to sign up and participate. Go to CoreyMCarlson.com/leadership to take advantage of the early bird pricing before it goes up. We launch this next challenge on November 1st. Look forward to seeing you in the program. Thank you. Welcome to the Win at Home First podcast. I'm your host, Corey Carlson. This podcast is where we talk about how successful business leaders win, not only at work, but also at home. On this podcast, we'll go behind the scenes with great leaders to hear stories of how they win. Thank you for listening, and on to today's episode. Hello, this is Corey. Today's episode with Andy is a great one. You'll learn more about him and what he has going on in his life and the company he just launched. Get your tissues ready. It's an emotional podcast, but in a good way. He does have a difficult story, but the way he has just grown his marriage, his family, and now even his business from it is inspiring. We talk about purpose and how purpose can change. This story in his life actually did in fact change his purpose. I know there's been events in my life that have changed who I am and now what I do. You know, we've heard your pain can become your platform. Your mess become your message. Like all these different cliche statements we hear, but are actually true. And Andy is the same way. Something happened in his life. It's changed who he is and now what he's doing with his life. He also has a lot of great tips on marriage and how they've weathered difficult times as well as great times. He's got very helpful tools with the idea of discernment and how to care for your team, lead well. It is jam-packed with good stuff. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. On to today's episode. Hello, this is Corey Carlson. You're listening to the Win at Home First podcast. Today I'm joined by Andy Schoonover, who lives in Texas now, but we have some common friends in Cincinnati, and I didn't know Andy, but I always would hear about him. Somehow our paths would cross, and people would say, "Oh, do you know Andy?" And I never did. I reached out one time, LinkedIn. We then had a conversation in the spring and just hit it off well, and I got to hear some of his story, and I want to invite him onto the podcast to share his story and everything that he's had take place in his life and how that is impacting his current career move. And so, Andy, I'm excited to hear more about your story. Andy's launching a business called CrowdHealth here October 1st. He's married. He has 3 kids, a lot of which we'll be talking about today and how that has impacted him and his life. Andy, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Corey, man, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Andy, what is that key trait to win at work and win at home?
Man, I think it's discipline. I think some of your other folks who have joined you have said similar words around that. I mean, it is so easy in our culture to choose other things than home, especially if you have small kids. I'm sure many of your listeners do. Going home to a bunch of kids running around and screaming at home oftentimes feels less appealing than staying at work and getting things done and things that really drive that dopamine. So you just have to be disciplined about it. I've gone through phases of my career where I wasn't, and I think I'm now at a place where, as you mentioned, I'm doing a startup and which is just a ton of fun. Starting a company, and so you just have to be disciplined about being home and being engaged with those kiddos. And I would say that we started our company back in April, and I think there's probably 2 days I didn't make it home by 5 o'clock to be with my girls and have dinner. I mean, that is just a time that I just don't give up for anything. So it's just about discipline and being able to say no to some other things that will pull you in a bunch of different directions.
And discipline can also be very seasonal, as we talked about before we hit record. You were able to come home by 5 o'clock a lot here in, like you just said, April, May, but that may not be the case come the month of September, October, as you launch, just because it's going to be seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell us a little bit more about what the launch is looking like, but then how are you going to be disciplined to lead well at home when the work demands are going to be higher now than they have in your life for the last few years?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I even told my team going through the next couple of months, which we're launching in October, we're starting our signups in September. So I told my team that, between 5 and 7 o'clock, I'm with my kids, I'm with my family, and there's nothing that's going to get in the way of that. So I set the expectation with them. I set the expectation with my wife that said, hey, I will be home from 5 to 7. I'll be fully engaged. I'll put the phone down, but at 7, when the girls go down for bed, I got to be back on it for a couple hours. And is that okay with you? And she gave me the thumbs up. She's like, look, I get it. This is something where for this couple of months, for this season, it is okay to maybe not, fulfill my love language. Her love language is quality time. So, time is really, really important to her. And she's said, I'll give you some grace during these couple of months. And so it's just setting expectations both at work and at home. And if you set those expectations, if you say those things out loud, I have the folks at work who actually push me and say, hey, you're leaving at 5, right? You're leaving by 5 to get home to your family. And they hold me accountable too. So I've been blessed with some folks at work that will hold me accountable, but will also, help out if there's some things that require some attention after hours. They'll help me out on those things and support me in that. So I think, to win at home, you have to win at work and vice versa. And a part of winning at work is just having the right people around you who will give you grace, and sometimes where you have to leave and take care of family needs. So I think that's just a really important part of our culture at CrowdHealth. We literally had somebody this morning who daughter has anxiety, we have an all team meeting this morning, had anxiety, wouldn't get to go to school because she was worried about going to school. It's when we're taping this, it's day 1 of school. And so we're just like, okay, yeah, take care of your family, get that kid off to school. That is way more important than anything we're going to talk about during our team meeting. We'll take notes, we'll get you up to speed, no big deal. If you build that culture, then you really can, it gives people space to hold each other accountable. I think that's really important.
You made a comment about just saying it out loud, and there's so much power in words where if we say them to our family, like these are the expectations of my schedule, let's hear your schedule, wife and kids. And then for the work team to talk about what your expectations of them, as well as even yourself. And once we say that, how people can start to readjust their own schedules or have a preparedness. I know for me, when I look at earlier days in my marriage where we get tripped up, is I wouldn't say the schedule. I just kind of wing it. And then maybe right there at the end of the day, I'd call and say, I'm going to be 2 hours later or whatever. I've decided to go to this happy hour or whatever it could be. Never communicate. Now it's on the front end of the week where Holly and I'll get together on, say, Sunday night and kind of talk about the whole week. What are the nights we're eating in, eating out. When I'm gone, and it's helped tremendously. So it sounds a lot like what you're doing.
Yeah, expectations are everything, right? Like as you said, if I tell my wife I have a happy hour, this week, if I tell my wife that on Sunday, it's a lot easier than on Wednesday at 5 o'clock when I get home. So setting those expectations is just so key. And we've been married for 7 years now. I will tell you, I'm way better at it in year 7 than I was in year 1 and 2. The selfishness of human beings as you go into marriage is real. and it manifests itself in a whole wide variety of ways, one of which is being on my time as opposed to being on our time. And that's just one of those things through, I think marriage is sanctifying in that way, and that it kind of rips out some of that selfishness and really starts, your mind starts thinking about us instead of me, which is kind of a really important transition in your marriage that some people candidly never get to. But the faster you can get there, I truly believe the better marriage that you'll have.
Absolutely. I think a big piece for Holly and I, and this is true of all couples, is my wife's pretty much always going to say yes to me saying I need to go to a happy hour, or I need to go do networking, just because I'm the provider for the family, and she knows if I'm saying I need to go to a happy hour networking, she's going to know I vetted it and it's worth my time. But she's always going to say yes. It's just if I ask her if I can go, if I kind of bring her into the conversation, then she feels included. She feels more of a partnership than me telling her what I'm doing and, figure out logistics yourself, babe. Figure out how to get the kids everywhere. I'm going to go to do my thing. And I think it's just that whole idea of, basically collaboration and partnership, like you mentioned, as opposed to, just, hey, this is the agenda. Figure it out, babe.
Yeah, I think there's another part of that too, which is trust, right? Like she's trusting that you're actually going out and doing something that's going to support your family and not just going out and hanging out with the dudes, all the time, right? And I think there's a very key kind of piece of life that hanging out with the dudes is really important, but you only can play that card so often before it's like, okay, I got a bunch of kids here that I'm trying to take care of too, so help me out. And so it sounds like you and your wife have some trust there, where it's like, if you're really going to do this, this is something that is going to help us as a family in the long run.
Well, I just got to keep showing that the lag indicators are working.
Yeah, exactly.
If I say the lead indicators are these happy hours, and all of a sudden lagging, now it's going to be back to trust. But no, that's good. Andy, good. When we started our conversation, I mentioned the fact that you have 3 kids, and I know that's a big part of your story, and even what brought you here to launch CrowdHealth. Mm-hmm. Would you just share about your 3 kids?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a little bit of backstory just to give you a little bit of context. But our paths did cross in Cincinnati. Both went to Crossroads. I got baptized at Crossroads, and so it was a big part of my faith journey. I was running a healthcare technology company there in Cincy. Sold that company in 2014 and moved down to Austin. And it didn't help that it was negative 12 degrees the day we sold the company. It was one of those polar vortexes, which the folks in the Midwest understand and know well. The people in the South are like, polar vortex, what the heck are you talking about? I was like, please trust me, you don't want to deal with that. So my wife and I were like, we're going to head somewhere sunny for a little bit. And so jumped in the car, headed down to Austin, thinking I was going to do something entrepreneurial. And we were newly married, and my wife got pregnant right away, Steph. And we found out during our 12-week ultrasound that our daughter had a fatal condition. So doctor, it's your normal 12-week ultrasound. Anybody who's, got, kids out there knows you see your baby that actually looks like a baby for the first time, with head and 10 fingers and 10 toes. And she was twirling around, and, we were sitting there in the ultrasound, and the ultrasound tech left. We didn't know any better. This was our first. The doctor walked in and was kind of quiet. And I was like, okay, so, why are you quiet? I just sensed something was up. And he kind of looked at us, and he's like, hey, I'm sorry to tell you, but your daughter has a fatal condition called anencephaly. There is no cure. She will pass away. And so we suggest that you terminate and try again. And for us, it was just like, we saw our daughter there. We saw our daughter. And for us, just given our faith background, it was like, we're going to give Grace, who's her name, we named her Grace, life in whatever way that God intended that life to look. So the doctor's like, okay, probably going to die in utero. Probably, if she makes it, to term, probably going to die in the birth canal. If she makes it out, then, she will probably take a breath and pass away. So we said, okay, well, we're just going to walk that journey. And so as you can kind of imagine, the next 6 months between that ultrasound and Steph giving birth to Grace were actually incredible times for us as a family. My wife and I had just gotten married, and then we had Grace. And so, we took her to the park, and we, as again, parents know they kick and you can push on their feet and they'll kick back. And it was, the only real time that we got to play with her. And so, we fast forward 6 months and Grace did make it to term. She was born and she lived for 10 and a half hours, 10 hours and 32 minutes before she passed away. That was back in 2015. So we're 6 years removed from that, but I still just live that day over and over and over again, as you can imagine, given it was just such an impactful spiritual experience. One where me and my wife were and Grace were just incredibly connected for 10 hours and 32 minutes. And this was in the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. We just spent time with each other, and I read her books and doing things that, you do to a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, because it's really the only time that we were going to have with her. So, she passed away. And I think the hardest part of that was, as you can imagine, Corey, handing your daughter over for the last time to a nurse who, she had passed away, but, you would never get to see her again. And so it was just a really hard, difficult time. And then you go home and then just the enemy starts just hammering you and your marriage. And at that point, less than a year into our marriage, already kind of an interesting situation when you go from single to married, but then losing a child on top of that. Just a really, really tough experience. So I came out of that, spent the next couple of years just trying to figure out how to keep my marriage together. The D word was thrown around several times. We can kind of talk about, how males and females mourn in very different ways, generally. And, males, we want to go and be by ourselves, and females wanted to engage. And when you get those two things counteracting, it's a pretty interesting experience. And so, we just focused on our marriage for 2 years after that. And then we kind of came out of that, it's one of those things where if you go into one of those experiences, either your faith gets stronger or it dissipates. I was a new believer, and I, thank God our faith got stronger, and we really relied upon, the Lord to get us through that. And as a result, we were kind of Romans 8:28. It's like, he works all things for good, for those who love him are called according to his purpose. And so we were like, all right, Lord, what are you going to do with this? How are you going to Romans 8:28 this one for us? And my wife started a nonprofit called Carrying to Term, which is to help women walk through that journey. I mean, she's got about 3,000 women hitting her website every single month, looking for resources. And for me, it was helping my wife with that nonprofit, and really growing that, and doing some other nonprofit stuff as well on the side. At that point, we had 2 more kids. So we have Ava and Caroline, and got health insurance, and it was $1,200 a month, $8,000 deductible. And, it worked until we had to actually use it. And so my little one, was 1 at the time, was having recurring ear infections. And so the pediatrician said we needed to go get tubes in her ears. So we went to the local hospital, got tubes in her ears. It was a 15-minute procedure, and it was $8,000 for 15 minutes. I was like, wow, this is crazy that this health insurance thing is totally screwed up. And, not to mention that, but the health insurance plan came back and said that they wouldn't pay for it. And so I decided to start a company to create an alternative to health insurance. So our kids, first Grace in our nonprofit endeavors, and now Caroline with some of her health issues, have kind of led us to our professions, which is kind of an interesting thing.
Well, phrase I say a lot, Andy, is handing over your story for a greater story. It's something I felt kind of spoken to me one night. It sounds like yours has been just a constant handing over your story for a greater story.
One of the things I've learned through this is I do think that God uses pain to glorify him, and he does use pain to sanctify us. And I just say, look, Grace passed away. She's dancing with Jesus. She got the better end of this deal. We're the ones that have to sit here with the craziness going on in our world. And so I've just kind of learned to appreciate the fact that, I got one daughter in heaven, which, praise God, I hope all my daughters go to heaven. So it really has been a truly a blessing for us.
So Andy, going back to that time with Grace, not only the whole, pregnancy, and then the 10 hours and 32 minutes, and then even that year or two afterwards, as you and your wife are trying to patch it all together. You mentioned you're a new Christian. I talk with clients and friends who some are new and some are older Christians, and just they start to question their faith. They start to get frustrated with what's going on in their own life or in the world. How did you navigate that with infancy faith at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and we were just so blessed that we felt like the Lord kept tapping us on the shoulder, saying, "I'm here." And we came home from the hospital, and like I said, the enemy just was hammering us from all directions. And one of those was, we asked this question. I'm sorry I'll get emotional about it, but we asked this question. We said, to each other, we said, "Do we tell Grace that we loved her enough?"
Mm.
Right? So you have 10 and a half hours with your kid, and the first thing you ask yourself when you get home is like, did we tell her we loved her enough? Which is a silly question, but it's just the enemy's way of like trying to hammer us when we were down. And I went to bed that night and had a dream where I was Grace looking up at me and Steph and just flooded with this feeling of love that I've never felt before in my life. And for me, it was just like the Lord being like, yeah, you did tell her that. You did tell her you love her. And now she's feeling a love that you'll not be able to feel until you see me face to face. Right. And so it's just the way that it was like, oh, thank you, Lord. And then we had a pastor, nobody with Crossroads, some other dumb pastor who came and he said, well, we're not really even sure that, babies who aren't baptized will go to heaven. And I'm like, that's what you say to parents who just lost their baby. Like, I'm sorry, but you're an idiot, And, we go home, and of course, we're just totally devastated by that. And Steph had a dream where she could see Grace through one of those two-way mirrors. Grace was on the reflective side, and Steph was on the non-reflective side. And Grace was healed and beautiful. And in this most beautiful prairie of flowers that you'd ever imagine. And it was, for us, it was like the Lord saying, no, she's with me. And it's gorgeous, And so you just go through those things and you're like, man, thank you, Lord, for touching us in little ways. And people are like, oh, it's just a dream. That's just your body. He's like, no. Read the Bible. God talks to us in dreams. It's happened since, Genesis. And so, we really just kind of had those specific examples where it was like, it was clear that the Lord was involved and hadn't left us. And so it was, those were the key moments in the infancy of our faith where we were just blessed with the opportunity to kind of feel the Lord in a pretty intimate way. So I think that's one of the main reasons we can kind of go back to those stories and be like, no. There is a greater being that loves us tremendously, and especially when we are mourning. So that's kind of how we made it through early. It was very little to do with us and everything to do with him.
Thanks for sharing all of that vulnerability and story to help us all. And I agree. It's that pain becomes our platform to help others and bless others. And all of us can basically, take from your story and ourselves just try to get better. I assume now with your other two, there's just an intensity in your attention to them that we all should adopt as parents. And Lord willing, I don't have to ever experience anything like you did, but I would sure love to make sure I'm loving like I experienced something like that.
Yeah, I mean, kind of funny. My 5-year-old, I think I tell him I love him 10 times a day. She's like, I know, Daddy. I know that you love me. I was like, I know you do, but you got to hear it. You got to hear it out of my voice. And actually, I learned something from Tim Seneff, who was one of your kind of earlier guests over the last month or two. And he tells his kids, he's like, tells them every day, he's like, I love you and I will never leave you. And I think his kids had the same reaction. Like, I know, Dad, I know you're doing, but no, you need to hear it, right? As we were talking about earlier, Corey, comes out of your mouth. There is a power to saying that to your kids, to your wife, right? And so my kids, I really do think they feel my love. At least I hope so. And, I think it's one of the reasons why I'm just so keyed in on being there from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. It's our family time. That's the time of the day where I can love them really, really well. And sometimes I do better than others, but I think it is one of those reasons why I've just made it an absolute mandate within my life to be there for them during dinner time and bath time, and saying prayers with them before they go down to bed.
So I know you've been around campfires, or you've been at ministry events or whatever it may be, and you're talking, you see a grown adult who is still kind of searching and looking for those words of love from their earthly father.
Mm.
And we also know that a lot of us view our heavenly father as a little bit how we saw our earthly father. So if we don't feel that our earthly father loved us enough, ever said, I love you, we start to think our heavenly father is not one of love. It's one of dictatorship, or it's one of working for their approval. Any of those pieces. So I completely agree. All of us making sure we're hugging and telling our kids we love them numerous times, and affirming them who they are.
No, I mean, I grew up with a dad where I probably heard "I love you" maybe a half a dozen times in my entire childhood. So I think it is something too that you try to correct some of the sins of the past, and maybe a little bit overboard with my kiddos, but I would way prefer to go that direction than the other one. So yeah, kids are a sanctifying blessing for sure.
Yeah, sure. If it's I love you, and it's you say yes to anything they ask to, then all right, now we've probably gone too far. Now we're just entitling them, and it's a coddly environment. But if it's I love you, and it comes with truth and grace, and invitation and challenge, and then it's different. Now we're setting them up for success.
Yeah, it's a weird tension, right? You can't be so soft that you don't discipline, because that's a really important part of it too. And then the understanding that there are consequences. I think the most unloving thing that you can do as a parent is focus on making your kids, doing everything to make them happy. No, sometimes it's okay if they're not happy, because they need to understand the consequences of their actions. And so it's just one of those tensions. And I think, one of the challenges of marriage is, I think men and women generally take a different approach to, how to discipline their kids, or even engage with their kids. And so it is, challenging, but man, if you can take that challenge, and I'm one who's take challenges as kind of fun. It's like, okay, this is something that's kind of fun. Let's get into this. Let's read some books. Let's figure out, let's read the most important book on how God disciplines us. Right. And my wife and I are challenged by a 2-year-old who, when you say you're going to timeout, will celebrate and think it's the coolest thing ever that she gets to go to timeout. And a 5-year-old who, if you go to timeout, it's the end of the world. And so I feel like the Lord gives us these kids to steward, partially because He knows the things that we have to work on to look a lot more like Him, right? So it's fun. Fatherhood is a blast, but it is a challenging one. They said, is it easier to start a company from scratch and grow it, or be a dad to a 3 and a 5-year-old? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure which is easier. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, they both require situational leadership, strategy, intentionality. But so often we do that at work, and we forget to do all those pieces at home. We just wing it. Broad brush.
There's no MBA for parenting. At least if there is, I haven't seen it. Right? Starting a company, you know what a P&L looks like? A lot of it is formulaic. If you do this, then this will happen. In fatherhood, you have no clue. Like, a lot of times, you're like, I'm not sure if I'm helping this kid or hurting this kid, because there's just no formula. You can look at 2 different books and they say the exact same thing. You're like, Lord, I'm just trying to do my best. And that's, I think, a part of why there is no formula. So I continue to rely upon Him for guidance as opposed to us, right? Go to the self-help book of all ages, which is the Bible. And it's not a self-help book, but you know what I mean? Like the perfect manual for living versus, something from the new age coolest person who's, talking about, the latest parenting expert or whatever. And that reliance upon Him, I think, actually, is what He's after. And parenting, I think, might be a key component in that.
To talk about your marriage now, you guys obviously can handle trials and tribulations with the best of them, because early on in the marriage, you faced a child's death, which would be obviously awful. but yet got through that, and the spiritual warfare that came with it, and doubt and insecurities and everything that took place, but yet you guys rallied together. And as you kind of fast forward over, a total of 7 years of marriage, what does that look like, and how you guys are handling conflict, or how you're handling challenges in your life to help us listeners as we have challenges? I mean, are there things that you guys do? Are you faster to resolve because life is short? Are you, what are those pieces that you do to help us?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say we're totally awesome at it, but I will tell you that there are some things that over the years we've really learned. And one, just being believers and seeing the closest analogy to Christ loving us, right, in marriage, because we will fail each other on a daily basis, just like we fail our God on a daily basis. And just to remember the grace that he gives us daily, and how we're supposed to reflect that within our marriage. I mean, if you set that at the core of your marriage, I think that's a really good foundation from which to build a really good marriage. And I would say, the other couple things is, we were really good accountants early in our marriage. I did this for you, so you should do this for me. It's and it's never 50-50. And that's a really good way of just tearing down a relationship, if you're always evaluating what they did versus what you did, right? I mean, we were just incredible at that early on in our marriage, and I think we've gotten a lot better at that now, right? We are selfish human beings, and so there's still that pull to say, well, I did this, and so you should do that. Or look at all of these things that I've done for you. Why aren't you doing all of these things for me? I mean, it's just toxic to think of like that. And so I think we've gotten, a lot better and kind of refocused on, instead of what can you do for me, it is what I can do for you. And if you take that approach of where am I going wrong on this, as opposed to continuing to focus on what you're doing wrong in this, I think you go, a lot further. And that's something we've just gotten a heck of a lot better doing in our relationship, is like, hey, let's not point fingers that way, towards the other person. Let's point fingers at ourselves. How are we helping this fight or hurting this fight? Depending on how you look at it. And let's focus on that as opposed to what the other person contributed. And that's just been super helpful. And I mentioned love languages, early on. I love that book. Corey, I'm sure you've read it or seen it, right? Which is basically, there are 5 love languages, and we are all kind of motivated or feel loved by one of those being expressed to us. And my wife, like I said, is quality time, and mine is words of affirmation. So when I don't feel like I'm being affirmed by my wife, it's easy to point to her and say, you're not affirming her. But what's much harder is, oh, well, maybe I haven't spent quality time with her. If I haven't spent quality time with her, her love tank is going to be empty. If she hasn't affirmed me, then my love tank is going to be empty. And so I'm not going to want to, have the lots of quality time with her. Right. So it's a perfect example. We can always point at the other person, but we're like, look, we're not doing what we need to do for the other. And therefore we're probably not going to get what we want for ourselves. And so it's just been a kind of a reorienting of how we think about those types of things in our marriage. So, it's been an interesting 7 years, as I've kind of mentioned, but I feel like we've gotten to a really good place. I would say the other thing, Corey, is after those original couple of years, the D word does not come into our conversations, right? I mean, this is like, no. We made a vow between each other and a covenant with God to say, no, we're married. You put us together, 2 becomes 1. We are one flesh, and therefore there is no getting out of this. We are committed to one another through the covenant with the Lord. And if you're at that place, it can get really bad, and you can still move on and have some hope for the next day. So there's been a kind of a key component of our marriage as well.
Hey, Crossroads pastor, you and I both know Chuck Mingo. He shared the idea that contractual relationships, they have a clause in there that say because of. So we're going to work together because of these different reasons. But there's always kind of a caveat to exit, if because of that breaks. Whereas Covenant relationships stay together because it's regardless of.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of what happens, if there's a death in the family or there's whatever takes place, regardless, we're sticking through it. We're going to figure out how to make this happen. Just like with whatever we do to Jesus, if we betray him, do something, he's always there to come back to. Much like how we need to be in our marriages, that it should be a regardless of. Doesn't mean it gives you free reign to go do whatever you want, but it's still just a big difference between, you're right, that D word would have been thrown around a little earlier in Holly's and my relationship as well. Now we don't. Now it's like we're figuring this out. Whatever it may be, we're going to figure this out, work together. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Before we go back to the rest of this episode, I want to share with you my book, Win at Home First. Some of you have read it, so thank you very much. For others of you, you have not. And I encourage, if you're looking for a resource to help you with these times of your work is now in your home and your home is now in your work and what this looks like, this book is being helpful to many leaders like you. Forbes magazine said it was one of 7 books everyone on your team should read. And the book is broken up into 4 different sections to help you. First is about you, understand who you are. The second is marriage and ideas and tips to help with your marriage. Third is parenting. And the last is work. So these 4 different sections to help you recalibrate during this time and to help move forward. So if you are needing additional resources, I encourage you to check out my book, Win at Home First. It is available on Amazon as well as Audible. And so on to the rest of the episode. Thank you very much. You mentioned the love languages. Just one more example of opposites attract. God puts us with people who are our weaknesses, or, that we've got to lean on him to help grow and get better at.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big problem with me in the standpoint of I'm words of affirmation. Well, that's not necessarily Holly's strength. So early on in the marriage, I wanted to hear that. And so that's unfair to me to go to her to get all of my needs and approvals. And so it sets her up for failure. And so that's when it comes in a lot of spending my time in quiet time and understanding I'm approved by God and I don't need to go look for others' approval.
When you said that God puts us with people so ultimately so that we can grow to look a lot more like him, I think it's, hilarious in that way. They say opposites attract, as kind of a cultural saying, but maybe the Lord puts opposites together so that we are sanctified to that and can look a little bit more like him as a result of that. I mean, I kind of throw out all these different types of personality traits and things, but the Enneagram is one that I think is pretty interesting too. And I'm an 8, which is a driver, and my wife is a 1, and she kind of is, the detail oriented, and so I'm like, forget details. I'm going to just run. And she wants to know all the details. She wants to know the plans. I'm like, let's figure it out when we get there. And so, when you read through the Enneagram, an 8 and a 1, it said, you two are like fire and ice. And I'm like, oh, great. Okay. Now I see why the Lord put us together to build grace for each other and again, weed out that selfishness. And so it's just funny how that works. I love it. I love the Lord's sense of humor in that.
Well, we can give another Enneagram example. I'm a 3,
okay,
which is the achiever,
Sure.
go, and don't ask a lot of questions, go. Holly's a 6, which is loyal, which she'll be loyal, but she's going to ask a lot of questions to know what she wants to do. And early on in our marriage, I took those questions to think she was doubting me. Like, what do you think? I didn't do any research? You think I don't know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And so that would cause its own battles. But when we did the Enneagram, 3 years ago, that was a breakthrough in our marriage.
Yeah.
Because now when she asks questions, I don't take it she's questioning my wisdom. Instead, that she's preparing her heart and her mind for the journey to come with me.
Yep.
And then at the same time, you and I both, as a 3 and 8, we need people to ask questions. We need people to question us because we may go off a cliff 100 miles an hour.
Well, and I think that also just shows, like, if you start realizing that within your marriage, you can also start realizing that within relationships outside of your marriage. If there are, I've asked all the people in my office, we have 10 folks now. I know their love languages. I know their Enneagrams. I know those things because the way that they respond to specific situations are very much a part of their personality, right? I mean, personality is kind of a key component of that. And so instead of me flipping out that all the ones in my office want to ask 22 questions before we get to a decision and have a really hard time moving from step one to step two, I can be pissed off and irritated, or I can say, okay, they're ones, Andy. That's just how they operate. It's the way that their brain works. And you have a little bit more grace for that. And then on the flip, they have more grace from me because they know that Andy wants to go, 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 right? And if you can figure out a way that the eights and the ones, who are very different types of people, can work together, you actually come out with a much better outcome, right? Even in marriage, I think my one wife and me eight, we have more fulfilling, fun, planned, organized, stuff, as a family as we would if we were both eights and we were both go, go, go. So, I think that some of the things you're learning at home and some of the things you learn at work do apply to the opposite, right? And so my people were like, "You're going to actually ask us our love languages?" I was like, "Yeah, I do. I want to know what fills you up," right? Because I think the way your husband or your wife fills you up is not is not that different from the way that I can fill you up. If words of affirmation is important to you, I want to make sure that if you do a good job, I affirm you. So it's just kind of an interesting kind of way to look at that, love language and Enneagram, and throw a third book in there, Love and Respect, which is another one I really, really love. So yeah, all of those are really good ones. And all, some of them are not biblically based, but you can see examples of this biblically. And there are good books to help take some of these structures and kind of take it a biblical context. So yeah, those are three good things that my wife and I talk about a lot.
Oh, that's good. You mentioned Enneagram and company and just overall emotional intelligence of the company. A lot of people or old school think that those are soft skills. You don't need to know those things. Man, there's been so much breakthrough when working with teams. I'll go in and speak with companies about the Enneagram, or we kind of have a whole emotional intelligence talk, but a lot of it will also be on the Enneagram. And you just see apologies start to fly out across the table and understanding and more empathy. It's amazing how that works. It works in the marriage, as we talked about, and also works at companies. So it's pretty wild to see, and hopefully more and more continue to pull in that EQ stuff into their companies.
Totally agree. I mean, I'm all about diversity in companies and kind of multiple facets, but I think that the diversity of personalities and enneagrams and things like that, man, they can make a company a lot better, a lot more thoughtful if you have a good diverse set of enneagrams or personality traits within your company. So it is something that probably 10 years ago I would have told you you're nuts, but I have learned that that's a really important piece of growing a company.
So you're launching CrowdHealth here pretty soon. Tell us just a brief about CrowdHealth.
No, thanks. So I had this situation with my daughter and was just blown away by how inefficient the healthcare system was. And, some interesting stats were 300,000 people last year that had health insurance and still went bankrupt because of medical bills. The middle class has not seen real wages grow in about 35 years because of health insurance growth, right? So this is a huge issue within our society, and I love trying to tackle big problems. And so we built a company called CrowdHealth. And basically what we're doing here is, doctors hate health insurance as much as we do because they spend about 30% of their time dealing with health insurance. And so what we found out is if we could go in there and pay the doctor directly the day of the procedure, they will actually give us 30 to 40% discounts on what health insurance plans are paying them. And so, as a result of that, we can build a network of doctors across the country who, will take cash pay rates, direct pay day of procedure rates that are significantly lower. And therefore, we built a company that is about 50% of the cost of health insurance plans. So I mentioned earlier, I got on healthcare.gov. It was $1,200, $8,000 deductible. Under CrowdHealth, my family of four will be $700 and a $500 deductible. So it is significantly less than what you'll pay in healthcare.gov. And we think this is a way to revolutionize the way that we pay for healthcare. Pay the doctors directly, take the health insurance plan out of the middle, because all they're doing is adding inefficiencies. So some key components here: no doctor network. So you can choose whatever doctor you want. We just ask you to let us know before you go to the doctor so we can negotiate that rate with the doctor before you get there. It'll be paid before you get there. So just a simple, easy to use alternative to health insurance is what we're building. So we're launching October 1st. Sign up start September 1st. So we're really excited to get started and give people access to something like this. And just so you know, that this has been done, actually, it's not brand new. It's been done for 25 years within faith-based communities. So many of your listeners have been a part of Christian healthcare ministries or Samaritan or Medishare or one of those. And basically what we're doing is we're taking that model and giving it everyone access to it. So you don't have to be of faith. You can be agnostic, atheist. You can be a Christian. You can be Jewish. You can be whoever, and join our community. So that's one of the main differences between us and some of the faith-based sharing organizations out there. So we're excited to get started. And if anybody, viewers are interested in learning more, they can go to joincrowdhealth.com and take a look. We hope they'll consider us.
Yeah, we'll put all that information in the show notes as well. Andy, you've got a big idea to go and create this organization. How do you balance selfish ambition versus a godly ambition and have patience to, in fact, build this business as opposed to, let's go, I want it now?
Yeah, especially as an Enneagram 8, right? Like let's go, let's do it now, let's get going. And, and I think love, joy, peace, patience, right? Number 4 in the fruit of the Spirit. I'm not sure if he ranked order them or not, but it's pretty important, clearly. And I think it's just being dedicated to quiet time, making things going on, in our families, in our work, kind of a key component of that quiet time. And then just waiting for the Lord to say yes. And, there were things that kind of were stacking up one after another. And I was like, Lord, if this is yes, then, keep that door open. And if this is no, then please smash it in my face, because I would prefer that than running down a path that you don't want me running down. And so I think it's, I've learned as I've gotten older that I can get, again, especially as an Enneagram 8, I can get really excited about something, but that excitement might last for a day or maybe even a week. But if I've got something that I'm excited about for a month or 2 months or 3 months, then I feel like it's the Lord, the Spirit putting it on my heart to go and do it. So I think spending a lot of quiet time discussing it directly with the Lord, waiting for him to say yes. And then, just knowing yourself and how your emotions work to understand, is this me emotionally, just wanting to do it in the fleshly way, or really the Spirit calling me to do it? And I would say 10 years ago, it was me in a fleshly way, just going after whatever looked like was fun and could get the dopamine levels up. And now it's a little bit more of a patient. All right, Lord, you tell me if this is something that you want me to do. So quiet time and just being patient is kind of the key components there, I think.
In your quiet time, how do you discern if it's flesh-led or spirit-led?
Yeah, I think there's some discernment steps that you need to take, right? 1 is prayer. 2 is, getting into the word. 3 is talking to your spouse about it. 4 is talking to your community about it. And if you can get through those levels of discernment, then, and come out at the end still really excited about, what you're doing, then again, my prayer at that point is like, Lord, I'm going to go hard after this. You told us biblically to work hard for you, as if we were serving you. And if you don't want this to work, then have it end sooner rather than later. And if it's later and you want me to learn as a result of that, then give me the heart to accept that, right? And it's a startup, and so this may not work. and so if it doesn't work, it'll be interesting or fun to have me on the podcast again and say, okay, so you told us you went through this discernment process and you thought the Lord still wanted you to do it, but it didn't work. So what do you learn from that? I was like, look, maybe the Lord could kind of be like, meh, I don't really care if CrowdHealth works or not, right? Like that's a very small piece, a one piece of sand in his, kingdom. And so he's got grander plans than CrowdHealth. And so I've got to be okay with that. I don't know exactly how the dominoes fall to make his, to glorify him, and maybe I'm starting, a path of dominoes that's going totally in an unknown direction that I don't see, that is doing wonderful things to glorify him. I may never know it until I see him face to face. And if that's the case, awesome. If it's disciplining me or somebody on my team or whatever, I got to say okay to that too. So it's just surrendering all of that to the Lord and be like, I don't know how you operate, but I'll just trust that you're doing things to better me, right? To look more like you and to glorify you ultimately. So that's a hard thing to kind of grasp sometimes, especially for non-believers who hear that and like, you're dumb. Like that doesn't make any sense.
You're dumb.
But it's like, look, if all you're trying to do is glorify him, then it's like, all right, if I can glorify you by failing better than if I succeed, then great. Mm-hmm. If we are super successful and the Lord knows that money, which the love of which is the root of all evil, that having that money as a result of success is actually going to make me look less like him, I should glorify him in that failure. Right. Yeah. But I don't know what it looks like 10 years from now. And he knows, how many hairs on my head will be left. I don't have many, but he'll know how many I have left in 10 years. Right. So, I just gotta surrender it to him, be like, yeah, okay. I'm going to do my best to glorify you in all that I do. And if I fail, I'm a human being. I fail. And I know that you're going to work that one for good too. Right. I know you're going to Romans 8:28, that one also.
Yeah, very true. The night before my book launched, I had a good friend, Nick, send me an email, and he was part of that whole 4-step discernment process you mentioned to write the book. He sent an email. There's many great words in it, but basically it came down to the point of, don't worry about how many books you sell starting tomorrow. It's not about the impact. It's about the obedience.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
And gosh, I've gone back to that so many times, not necessarily the email, but just that overall thought about a lot of these nudges we get. It's more just a step in obedience. And is CrowdHealth going to do amazing? Is my book going to do amazing? We don't know, but it may be the start of something down the road that maybe even someone else will do.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't even know.
Well, look, one of the coolest Bible stories of all time from my perspective, and it's not that talked about, but it's, Moses was sitting there watching the Egyptian beat up on the Hebrew. He kills the Egyptian, buries him, comes back the next day, and the Hebrews are like, hey, are you going to kill us now? Like you killed that guy, right? And it was a failure for Moses. And he, left for 40 years, tending to sheep, and which to him, he's like, man, he was in the Pharaoh's, inner clan, right? And now he's tending sheep. That might have looked like a failure, but the Lord was doing some amazing things with him in his heart. He was doing some amazing things back in Egypt where he had to get those things done before he could lead the Israelites out of Egypt into the promised land. And so, you kind of look at that and was like, man, I hope I don't have to wait 40 years, for the Lord to do some of these things. but failure, he does work failure for good. And over and over and over again, and we see it in every biblical story. I mean, David and, Moses and all kinds of people. Mm-hmm. So incredible the way that the Lord works through, very, very broken human beings.
Well, I love that in Exodus 3, when God does confront Moses at the burning bush with all that, and Moses like, who am I?
Yeah, who am I?
Knowing that he was a murderer, knowing that he wasn't a great communicator, just knowing all the baggage and the brokenness he brought to the situation, but yet God was calling him up to use him. And all of us can get so much, peace out of that story because we are all broken, but yet being called up and equipped and empowered to go do things to expand the kingdom.
I love the humility in that.
Well, Andy, we could keep going, having fun with this, but we probably should end this here. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
You can email me directly at andy@joincrowdhealth.com. Go to joincrowdhealth.com to talk more about the business. And seriously, anybody who listens to this, feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, all that stuff. Feel free to hit me up on any of those platforms. I'd love to have more conversations like this. So I appreciate the time, Corey.
Thank you very much, Andy, and sharing your story and vulnerability.
Thanks, brother.
I want to thank you for listening to my podcast, Win at Home First. I am so grateful to hear from listeners like you that this content has been helpful. So now I would love for you to pay it forward. I want to get this message in the hands of more listeners. We need leaders to be winning both at home and at work, especially during this time. So please take a minute to share this episode with somebody you think would find value in it, as well as rate and subscribe. As a thank you, please visit my website at corymcarlson.com to download a free resource that people are finding value in. Thank you very much.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.